Welcome to Know Happiness, a podcast about how we seek, find, and sustain happiness in some of the most unique places. Today, I have a very special guest, Nancy. Nancy is a poet, a writer, a family constellation facilitator, and I'm sure you're all curious what that is, a yoga teacher, and just explorer of the world. So we're going to get started, Nancy, if that's all right. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I really am so glad we get this time to sit down and talk all about your life because it's super fascinating. But first, I ask all my guests, what does happiness mean to you?
Well, the definition has changed through the years. I think for me right now, happiness is having rich, meaningful relationships with others, having the freedom to explore my craft, and to be able to travel and go places and discover life.
I love that.
Yeah.
I can identify with a lot of those pieces. Well, let's just kind of dive into how you got into this world of spirituality. Like, where did it kind of begin?
Well, it's interesting. When I was 16 years old, I had a really cool psychology teacher. Actually, it was a sociology teacher in high school. I read the book Illusions by Richard Bach. Okay. And it's a book, it's just a story, but it's about the themes of exploring the nature of reality and really using our imagination to create things. And it's really about like life being magical. And that was kind of a pivotal point in my life, I think, turning me toward a more spiritual path. Of course, being born in the family that I was born into set me up to explore. So there was alcoholism in the family, and that later impacted my career choice. And something about having wounds that we can learn to untangle from so that we can find our way in life. So, just by way of being born into a particular family, but also meeting people like, teachers along the way, and then kind of finding that path with my family as well. There was healing in the family. So it all just kind of set the ground for things.
So, a question around your family, because I personally believe, and sometimes I think this sounds odd to people, but that we choose to incarnate into a particular family system for a reason, for lessons of, for opportunities to really heal maybe past life wounds and things. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say I agree for sure. And it's interesting. Later, through hindsight, it's kind of the bridge to our faith and how we untangle things. But, that experience of alcoholism impacted so many things, right? It taught me how to be codependent so I could later untangle some of that codependency. I'll just throw this out there. My mom married my dad 3 times.
Oh, no way.
So there was recovery and then, addiction and then not so much recovery. And then, so yeah, to me, it's a choice, in terms of, it's not like it's all fixed, but certainly that paved the way to watch my father get in a program that shifted his life. And then me starting to learn about how I was impacted by growing up in that system. And that kind of put me on the path of my own recovery. Yeah.
Interesting. With your dad, what program did he get into? And
he went into treatment. Well, he quit drinking when we were 12. They got a divorce. He quit drinking for a year. They got remarried. And then when I was about 16, he went into treatment. And he was very intense along the path of his alcoholism. So he did treatment and AA. And that started like a 14-year period of sobriety. It shifted his life. It was extraordinary to watch him go through that. And it's funny because his recovery coincided with my spiritual awakening into all things metaphysical and kind of studying some of that with my mom, after she divorced him that second time. So, we were both exploring a path of shifting the nature of reality.
Well, what's interesting is I can completely identify with that, certainly from your dad's perspective, because I am someone who's in recovery. I do go to AA, and it is a spiritual program.
Yes.
And so it seems very aligned that the two of you were going through this transformation.
Yes.
And while there can be a little bit of Christianity sprinkled in with AA, the concepts are really pretty universal, in my opinion.
Yes, I love that you brought that up because I would say that it's the 12-step programs that taught me about mindfulness. They feel very Eastern-based when you look at one day at a time, exploring a God of our understanding. And so that fit in with the things that I was studying and then watching him grow and develop, because there's personal growth and development, but also that spiritual piece of it too.
Absolutely. And as far as I'm concerned, for me, it was paramount and fundamental that I find myself in spirituality, because without that, you're kind of, the Lindsay show. I also love too how being of service to other people. And to me, that really translates the same to be like living in victimhood.
Yes.
And how when we are in service to other people, we aren't thinking about woe is me and here's all these issues, so it is really profound, and it does work if you continue with it, as you know. And we'll get more into your addiction recovery. You were a counselor, right?
Yeah, a counselor. I became a counselor and then worked on my own recovery as an adult child of an alcoholic, and exploring the way the family was impacted and then having to look at my own stuff.
Yeah, so let's just pop back to 16 and with your mom, because I think that is so fantastic that your mom went on this journey alongside with you. How did that all?
Well, it's so interesting, it's beautiful because she died right around about a year ago. And so, retracing that path, she had to go on her own path, or chose to go on her own path of self-exploration. And she did a little bit of Al-Anon, but was mainly just focusing on her own thing. And so we attended metaphysical classes together. I took an astrology class from my sociology teacher. Her and I went to a metaphysical teacher and spent a week in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. She wrote her high school paper on the Cheops pyramid. And, I didn't realize how open-minded she was then, because that was just my mom, right? But, I remember we did this metaphysical class and we did this past life reading where I was like a servant in Rome, and she was a boy who had a father that was like a governor. And, we just had these experiences. And so it was so cool. And of course, I was growing up and, coming from those kind of families, sometimes you grow up fast. But, as I began to move into adulthood, there was this friendship and where we got to explore this stuff together. And she was just very open-minded. She didn't push me on the path, but we both loved exploring it together.
I think that is amazing. Yeah. And I feel very blessed and grateful because I am on that same path with my daughter.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And, she too got this very young, and I'm so impressed. I've often said, like, man, if I'd have known what I know, back when I was that age, I'd have saved myself a lot of heartbreak. And then I remember that it's that heartbreak that's led me to where I am.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that because of your father's alcoholism, that led you to seek out more information and deeper knowledge and wisdom of yourself and understanding of life. And so it's like, thank you.
Yes.
To get to that place of like gratitude for these experiences that we think are just destroying us and our family. And in the moment, they probably are.
Yes, right. It's a piece of it, but it's the coming back from and all the learning that is the result of that. Yeah.
So you had mentioned Al-Anon, but then you had also mentioned a group called ACOA. And I'd love to know what the difference is between the two.
Okay. Yeah, Al-Anon is basically a 12-step program for family members that have someone who has a substance use disorder, alcohol, drugs, or whatever. So they're learning to cope because they're living with or have someone close in their life that's experiencing a substance use problem. Adult Children of Alcoholics, or ACOA, is really kids that grew up in that system, that dysfunctional family system. It can be addiction or other types of dysfunction as well. And really for the children to look back and see what were the ways that they were patterned that create codependency, and then how to recover from that. So, my father had gotten sober. I didn't need to go to Al-Anon because he was still drinking and I was dealing with that. But it was like, what's that imprint? And to really learn about the behavioral patterns that children growing up in those circumstances develop, and then how to recover from it,
Yeah, well, and I think that's important because so much focus is placed on the addict or alcoholic. And oftentimes the people around them, well, as you know, are just as sick, just in a different way. And once the alcohol and or drug is removed, those behaviors still stick around.
Yes.
So that that wanting to control, that checking
Yes.
in, that, and here someone is getting better and they're well, but people are still around them, treating them like they're not, and the relationship. So it really is a whole family disease.
Yes, and it's a system disease.
Yeah.
And that kind of moves into the Constellations work, where when there's one change in the family, a significant shift, the rest of the people in the system have to adjust.
Yeah.
Or will feel the impact of that. Yeah.
Well, and I think about there's a part in the AA Big Book that talks about, as an alcoholic, you create this tornado and all this wreckage, right? And then you stop drinking and everybody's like walking on pins and needles and just super nervous. And you're like, what? What's the problem? I'm good, but forgetting about this wreckage of the past and this path of destruction that, people are trying to move through and forgive and let go and begin to trust.
Yeah.
And so, I think, I'm applying that to my own life right now. And a lot of times with my husband, I'm like, I'm good, and two, you can't control my addiction.
Yeah.
You can't control whether I'm in. And I think because we love people so much, and I've been guilty of this because I've been with friends and family that have addiction challenges, and then you want to save them.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can't.
No.
And I love the saying, like anything you put in front of your recovery, you will lose. And there's a big, I feel that on a, like a lot of times I don't want to go to a meeting.
Yeah.
I don't want to go pick up the phone and call somebody, but it really is a matter of not what you want to do, but what you have to do.
Yeah. What are the practices?
Yeah. It's a matter of life or death, and it may not be an immediate one.
Yeah.
But slowly but surely, you begin to lose the people and things that you love.
Yeah.
So let's get into the next phase of your life, which was the addiction counseling that came after,
Yes.
20s?
I decided to, in watching that and also getting into exposed to the 12-step programs and then my own work, I ended up getting a part-time job as a counselor back in the days where you didn't have to have your bachelor's degree yet to do that. So I started doing part-time counseling at a treatment center. And I was automatically kind of good at it, right? Because I was the youngest of 4 in that system at home. But it brought up my stuff. And it was like the universe's way of saying, time to work on yourself, do a year of therapy, start attending adult children of alcoholics meetings, and look at your own development and how it's playing out in your life. So it was kind of like, oh, I'm getting this part-time job, but it's going to force me to do my own personal work so that I could do it from a healthy place and not from a place of trying to fix people so that I could feel better about myself, which is part of that entanglement. So that was beautiful. It was hard, but I loved being in the field, and I ended up quitting my other job, and they offered me a full-time counseling position. And I'm like, I'm getting paid to help people. This is really cool.
Yeah.
And I was probably 27 at that point. Then I decided to get a degree in addiction studies while I was working full time, and kind of did a independent study kind of college and got my 4-year degree eventually.
I think, again, I'll speak for myself. I'm really trying to be conscious of not making sweeping generalizations, but I have always felt more drawn to people who've had a lived experience.
Yes.
And whether that was with the addiction itself, or in your case, living with, to me, it's just easier to take suggestions from someone who's been there, done that.
Yes. And there's also a factor of being, this is just my biased opinion, but that life experience is, to me, where there's just more intensity, more beauty, more drama, more charm. It's just interesting. That lived experience also helps us open into the next phase of who we become.
Well, it's amazing to me because there's such a stigma around addiction, alcoholic, addict, even the title has a charge to it, you know, and I think it keeps a lot of people from getting help. But I have never met more quality people who live in sobriety, you know.
Yes, that part.
Yeah. You know, they would do anything to help somebody. I mean, they're always like, let's go help somebody move. I mean, it's just, it's really bright, sensitive, you know, like you just go down the list of these are just fantastic people that found, like, you know, people don't understand that your brain is actually doing exactly what it was meant to do when somebody finds relief, you know, from pain. Oh, well, then I want that. I'm going to keep seeking that. And how normal that is. And yet, you know, everyone has this, well, not everyone, but people have kind of a negative association with it. And I think the more we can share about that that's just a myth, the greater things will be and the easier people will be to go and get the help that they need.
What used to be more hidden is much more popular through, you know, social media and television. And, you know, it just kind of came out of the closet, you know, in terms of, oh, there's a lot of people suffering from some kind of addiction, whether it's a behavioral addiction or a chemical addiction or a food addiction or a social media addiction or on and on and on.
Right.
You know?
Well, I used to be, what are they called? It was for United Healthcare, and I would go around to people who needed mental health and or substance abuse services. Oh, I was a peer support specialist.
Yeah, recovery coach.
With my nursing background, because I had gotten in trouble with, you know, the nursing board. And so I was like, this is great. I have to have, I'll never forget the day that I literally was at the computer and I was praying because I could not find a job because I was kind of unhireable as a nurse with this on probation for diverting narcotics. And I literally just closed my eyes and I just said a prayer and I said, please God, help me find something. Like I just give me a sign, something. And the moment I open my eyes, I look and there's this ad that says must have mental illness and or substance abuse with 2 years subsequent recovery. And I'm like, no, I'm not reading that correctly.
Wow.
Like, that cannot be right. And I ended up getting the job and I got to travel all over the United States. I did such a fantastic job that I got Super Bowl tickets, I won all these awards. I had video, you know, because I just, it ignited something in me that, wow, like there's so many people who need resources and encouragement. And it also helped me see that nursing, while I've always kind of been a healer, it wasn't really my Western medicine had started to kind of like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel aligned. And so it was just like a perfect shift into another
segue into the soul, you know?
And it was just a beautiful career. So I can completely get how you could be drawn to something that, you know, potentially was like a negative thing in your life. So you're working as an addiction counselor, and I believe this is probably around the time you met your husband and had children or pretty close.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started working in the field, and then I started getting a degree through Park College in Kansas City, but I was still living in Wichita. And then when I was about 29, I just felt like I should move. And so me and my chocolate lab moved to Kansas City. I was already in the field and got a job at Bethany Medical Center as an addictions counselor. And shortly after that, shortly after moving to Kansas City, somebody shared a little bit about this 3-day transformational course called the Landmark Forum, Landmark Education. The forum is their entry developmental seminar. So that was another one of those, you know, junctures in time that changed the trajectory of my life.
So explain what that was.
Landmark Education is breakthrough technology. So basically there's a theme there. You look at the art of being human and look at the way humans are designed. And it's about creating breakthroughs, not just self-improvement, but breakthrough living through addressing the narrative and stories of your past that keep you locked into those patterns, right? So, you know, the kind of moving from victim to taking responsibility. It's one of the most extraordinary healing things on the planet. And I can't believe how everything changed. Like, I wanted to break through in relationships with men. I met this guy there. I wanted to break through in relationships with my body. I got one. It's kind of hard to explain, but there's lots of different philosophies that make up that groundbreaking work, and it's all over the world. So anyway, I met him there, and I ended up doing their core curriculum courses, was very involved with them for 3 years and led one of their training and development programs here in Kansas City. Met my future husband, and 3 years later, we had a couple kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, how cool is that to meet someone who's looking to make these big life changes and evolve and on a what I would presume would be somewhat spiritual path. And it is interesting how we draw those energies and people when we are willing to do the work. These things come. Like, if you build it, they will come.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So you had a couple children.
Yeah.
And tell me more. I want to hear more.
Well, it was just an extraordinary experience, and I loved living up in Kansas City. My whole family did the Landmark Forum, so I trained to actually market their programs and marketed for the courses that came to Kansas City. It was just, and so my husband and I were very involved in that. And then we were married for 17 years.
Wow.
Had 2 boys that were 3 years apart. And yeah, so that really taught me about living fully and being bold and taking risks and getting yeses out of life. It was kind of like another developmental step in the evolution of becoming who I wanted to become, but just with more power and more impact and velocity. Yeah.
Your kids were rather close in age, but I was just having this conversation, I can't remember with whom, about parenting in different seasons of your life. And maybe you've even noticed that, like, as they've grown older and you're older and, like, I think of my daughter, and I was 25 when I had her and had to work and was just in a totally different place in life than 7 years later when I had my son. And I think at times it's caused some contention for my daughter because she felt like he got a better version of me. And there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
Because I certainly had addiction challenges and had to work and all the things. But I wonder if you've noticed that through your parenting, how it's evolved.
Yeah, I love that because it makes me think of my mother's own, quest about her personal becoming when I was 16. And I kind of watched her do that, So I got married on my 30th birthday, had my first son at 33 and my second son at 36. So I think there was a maturity. I was like, God, if I would have known being a mom was so amazing, I would have maybe done it earlier, but I didn't find the guy and all that.
Right.
So it's perfect. We had a good life. They were very involved in sports. My ex was a language arts teacher and a tennis coach. And, we were busy and had fun. And I was working full time the whole time. Took 8 weeks off for both pregnancies, but breastfed both boys and got to use the amazing breast pumps at the hospital, so it just made life easy. But, we were like involved in a lot of stuff and it was really beautiful. And I began teaching yoga in 2001. And so, again, what another way to maintain that spiritual path. But we took the boys to Unity Church. So our relationship had really a very solid shared spirituality in terms of values, and still does to this day. I mean, we've been divorced for 15 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so, and the boys live out in Colorado and he lives an hour from them in Fort Collins. So, there's that maintained. It wasn't always there at the end of the relationship, but so yeah, just the weaving in and out of our own growth and development, and modeling, even choosing to get a divorce, which I was 45 when I got a divorce. The boys were like 9 and 12. And, even those hard things, and then making it through it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that I would love to know if you're willing to share at 45 getting a divorce. How did you hear a lot of people who stay in relationships when they know that they've expired and they're no longer an alignment, and how did you have the bravery as a 45-year-old woman and all the stories we hear about how hard it is out there and not wanting to be single and you don't want to be alone? Like, how did you do that?
Well, it's interesting. The thing about my parents is that they modeled that you could change your mind and then change it again. And that, you know, that it's okay to choose something different. So that was there. However, I didn't want to be the one to get a divorce. But of course, you know, you seek therapy and then go to another counselor because you want to keep it together, you know. So we did all those things. We tried but then there was a point in time where it was just kind of like, it's actually healthier to be out of this than to stay in something that isn't working.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I had a lot of family support. My mother and sister lived here in town, and it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
You know, harder than even losing my parents at some point. But trusting in the things that I'd learned along the way, you know, and knowing that our values and our love for the children would be okay even if we were in separate households.
I think that's really important for women who are contemplating this. What advice would you give to someone who...
Well, I like what you said about, you know, determining the viability of something, you know, when you try and it's like, for me, it's about trusting the internal landscape of what we've learned, and that if something isn't healthy, it's okay to change. You know, it's kind of like save yourself because your own well-being could also be for the highest good.
Right.
Versus caving to the pressures of, you know, staying up for the kids. Is that really healthy? You know,
right.
to keep being unhappy or whatever. And really at some point you just know that freedom, like having space and shifting the arrangement of the constellation of your family, is more important than worrying about how it's going to work.
How it all shakes out.
Yeah. And it's a process. It's not like
Yeah, I remember getting to a place with my first ex-husband where I thought I'd rather be homeless and living on the street because it was so toxic.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I was staying in that relationship in front of my child, that it was not going to be a healthy upbringing.
Yeah.
And so, but it is hard. And, you know, I was like in nursing school. I didn't have hardly any money. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, you know, and every year as I started making more money, I'd get a bigger place, you know. So then it was a 2-bedroom, and then it was a house, and, you know, like, which is funny because that's what was used against me in court, was because I was, you know, I'd moved so many times. No, I kept her in the same school district. I was really just trying to improve our lifestyle. So that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
Let's move into what family constellations is. And, you know, I know that it's a bit of a complex description, but let's try and get it as basic and elementary for people's understanding.
Well, let's see. It's interesting because it was somewhere around 2014, so about 4 years after my divorce, that I listened to a podcast as a single mom at 10 o'clock at night. And I heard this guy named Stephen Busby talking about a workshop. And I ended up going to a workshop that he was leading 6 weeks later in California because it just interested me. It was on higher frequencies of consciousness and, you know, expanding into life. Well, it was at that workshop that I first saw the therapeutic modality called family constellations. They call it systemic or family constellations. And basically, you know, it's on the premise that the unmetabolized past, things that happened in our past or the past of our ancestors, that which is excluded or can't be faced has an impact on the people in future generations. So certainly we know about it from direct recovery in family systems, But if it's something that might have happened a couple of generations ago that people couldn't bear or couldn't deal with, that which isn't acknowledged sometimes causes symptoms, patterns, and challenges through subsequent generations.
Just through the lineage.
Yeah. So there's a book by Mark Woyland called It Didn't Start With You, How Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are. So some of even those controlling things, go back, just like alcoholism may go back a couple generations. So part of it is, here I'm at this workshop, we're doing Constellations for 2 or 3 days. And I'm realizing at that moment, my kids were back with my ex. I was doing this work. And I just had this realization, it was almost like a direct knowing in the body, that this work I was doing was going into my children's lives in a very positive way because I was healing. But I also felt the work move back into my parents' lineage. So it's a very timeless modality. And basically, a facilitator gets trained on working in those systems. And it's a therapeutic group situation, and people in the group are chosen to represent certain aspects of somebody's issue. So if you decide to work on something, people in the group can represent certain aspects of that system, and it reveals the hidden dynamics, sometimes hidden dynamics that people aren't even conscious of in terms of what happened. So it's both practical and mystical. And it's a way to bring wholeness into a fragmented system.
And it's the people who are participating are literally like holding the space as like a physical
representation of something. And they may not know why, but when the facilitator, and as a facilitator, you're trained to work with that whole knowing field. And that's a big part of it. There's a knowing field that holds the consciousness of a particular system. And so when somebody stands in to it's fascinating. It's all the stuff that I love. And it's like, oh, we're going up another level to look at family systems and trauma. So when people hold that energy, they may start talking like the uncle 2 generations ago about something that happened, or whoever represents the mother, feels that need to control, or that inability to express love because that mother had an inability to express love. So things begin to happen in the system, and it's really extraordinary. And what happens is there's a movement and a flow that comes in, and there's more understanding and balance. It's not just cognitive, it's working with that knowing field. And people leave the Constellations work reporting movement and miracles and flow, and things happen, and they get the job, and they talk to their dad for the first time in a while. It's just really quite miraculous what happens as a result of that work. It was originally developed by Bert Hellinger, a German psychotherapist who went to the Zulu tribes and worked with them around the knowing field. And then he came back and kind of incorporated what he knew about family systems with the knowing field to develop this work.
That's amazing. And, I saw this several years ago. There was an episode on Goop.
Yes.
The docuseries, and they had this.
Yes.
That was the first exposure I had. I had no clue what they were doing, and it seemed profound to me, and how these people were like, they sounded just like my mother, and they were complete strangers.
Yeah, who didn't have to know anything about the
issue.
Yeah. And it's extraordinary. I love doing this work almost more than anything, and I've been doing a lot in the last couple of years.
Well, I'm gonna
after I got trained.
Yes, I'm excited because I would like to.
Yeah. Well, there's one May 18th.
Okay.
If you're interested, we'll talk about that later.
Absolutely. So with healing lineage, that reminds me of like epigenetics.
Yes.
And the imprint, like that trauma is really a genetic modification that comes down. And while, yes, you can turn it on and it can be expressed, or, not necessarily, but we do carry our ancestors' wounds.
Yes.
There's just no way you can't. If you believe in energy. And
that's right.
It's science.
And science. Yeah. No, I love that you brought that up. The collective trauma and all the neuroscience that is now backing it up. We carry the startle reflex from the grandmother who may have been in the war. Like those are all the things that they're bridging the science and the spirituality. So when you feel that knowing field, right, there's science to support that. It's really amazing.
Well, and that to me is kind of my favorite way, because there's so many skeptics that are like, oh, this is woo woo. And, it's so out there. And they just think that anybody who's into spirituality may just want to be, living in a commune and, dreadlocks and patchouli. And it's, that's a stereotype.
Yeah.
And I love that we are finally getting to a place where there's more explanation to the skeptic that's like, maybe there's something to that.
Yeah. And that which can't be explained, if it's still powerful and it's working, why not lean into it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you found Family Constellations and you're still working as an addiction counselor. What came next?
After my divorce, I had more time to study more intensely. I would go to yoga workshops in Colorado and really, explore more things. And I met Stephen Busby then, who was a spiritual teacher about higher frequencies of consciousness, and turned me on to Family Constellations. And then participating in that and really exploring different aspects of consciousness and leading circles, working with couples and individuals and groups. And I had been in the same job for 22 years, the same employer, doing different things, and loved it. But it was kind of like, as I continued to grow, the person satisfied with the addiction work, it just felt like it kind of came to an expiration.
Mm-hmm.
It was like kind of like, okay, that might be ready to do something
might be
else.
Complete.
Yeah. And I'd been teaching yoga since 2001. My mom invited me to a yoga class back then, so that was a important part. But that was just part-time work. And I had gone and traveled and gone to England and done some workshops and gone to Scotland for some workshops. And in 2018, I did a workshop in London, and I met people from all over the world, and we did some online courses, and I was assisting in those. And so the world just kind of widened. And I got this, I'm not even sure how it all happened, but I wanted to go to England for the summer for 9 weeks. And I was supervising 5 people, and I just thought I'd take a leave of absence, and, part of it would be paid for, but it didn't, that was kind of hard, being in that position. So I decided to turn that leave of absence into a resignation letter, and to see if, I thought, well, I was an addictions counselor. If I go for 9 weeks, I know some people that'll hire me when I get back. I could still be employed.
Right.
But I knew I wanted to be there for a long time for the 9 weeks. It was just like in my head. So I decided to give notice. And that same year, my boys both moved to Colorado. And I didn't know all of that was going to happen and line up. So I went to England, and it was a kind of an extraordinary lesson in following that impulse. I saw stone circles. I did a Tantra workshop. I fell in love with contact improv, which is the kind of dance that my friend Helena in London turned me on to. I read poetry at some of the dance festivals. I went to Cornwall. I went to Totnes, this little town, for 10 days on my own, because I got guidance in a plant medicine ceremony to be here on this date under the full moon. Just like trusting some of that. And there's something about my relationship with landscape and writing, and that emerged out of that. So many things emerged out of that that trip. And I came back to Kansas City, moved into an apartment that was less, so I could travel, right? And I never had to go back to the addictions job. I started working with people as an intuitive coach, continuing to lead consciousness groups and women's meditation weekends and things like that, and just kind of trusted, and the business built, and that was 4 years ago.
Wow. So you took the leap, and the universe answered the call and said, here you go.
Yeah.
We've got lots of great things planned for you.
Love that.
So explain to our audience what you mean when you say intuitive coach, because there may be people who don't understand that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Part of my work in training with Stephen Busby and another medicine healer that I worked with it was about leaning into the internal capacities that we have, the subtle energy capacities. So I had been doing that work, for about 6 years. And it's really a way of being present with people. So it's not, cognitive behavioral counseling like you might get, through a licensed clinical counselor, but really being such a witness and a listener for people that things can come forth. So I am intuitive, and I became more intuitive, and I gave myself permission to use that as I worked with people. So also being able to see particular developmental junctures with people as you work with them. And, it was just an accumulation of working and working and working and developing that. And it became its own thing,
Yeah. And I must say, Nancy, you are such a fantastic listener. Like, I can feel your energy. It's number one, it's very calming. It's very peaceful.
Thank you.
And it's very loving and nurturing. Like, you just, all these adventures, everything that you've experienced in your, however many years of life, you seem to be in just an amazing spot, and I'm just happy to know you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like the curriculum looking back in time. It's like, oh yeah, I was supposed to do that and supposed to do that. And then now my work combines all those things together. And there's so many portals for exploration into embodied living and really living with love and capacity and energy, and also daring, and travel and having good things happen, letting go a lot of the fears, the scrappy fears of growing up, but like, oh, life really is malleable. There was a reason I read that book at 16.
Mm-hmm.
There was a reason I got invited to Scotland. There was a reason I met that other healer and got into writing. And, just, it's kind of like looking at the signs of Indra's net, all the pearls that make up who you are, and trusting that this is my work. To let go of my vocation, which was very safe, and hope that I could get enough money to pay the rent. I just wanted to pay the rent, but it's like now it's evolved into so much more. Yeah. And also that capacity to serve and support people, and also be turned on and jazzed by the healing work that happens kind of without our doing.
Yeah.
To be a vessel for that, or a conduit for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I've noticed a lot of similarities in your story to mine as well, when it comes to all, like, I've been really diving deep these last 7 years and learning different things, from getting my yoga teacher training to getting energy healings, to past life regressions, and just almost like a remembrance. Mm-hmm. Like, there was a reason that I'm like, ooh, that's something I want to dive more into. And, and how that all evolves and turns into, like my craft today, and what I do with clients and people that I see is really just this meld of all these beautiful modalities and things with my experience. And that's why there's so much room for every person. There's not competition as far as I'm concerned, because everyone is so unique in their expression, because of all the things that they've experienced and the different classes and trainings and everything that they've taken.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
There's room for all our gifts.
Absolutely.
And in the way that we find what those gifts are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be 47 this year. And I had just discovered Kundalini activation. And it's like, it was an immediate, yes, this is something I want to go train. I want to learn how to do this. I want to learn how to not only give it to myself, but to bring it to other people. Yeah. So that, I feel like for me, I'm just always like a student of life. Mm-hmm. I don't ever want to stop. I'm still content, but I just have this deep hunger and fire in my belly to just keep learning.
Yeah, we share that. I love what you said about the remembering. Being in certain places in England felt like home to me, and going to Glastonbury for the first time, that was the origination of Al-Alon and the high priestess, and the times in the culture where women had, more authority in terms of spiritual leadership.
Yeah.
But I do think that we're drawn towards those things, and that part of our role here is to bring back the ancient ways of knowing into the
Yes.
world, especially now.
Yeah.
You know?
It was funny because when you were talking about England and all the I'm like, you had to have had a past life there. There's just no way. Like,
So many amazing, magical things happened on that land.
It is so admirable that you are going and just taking it seems like every summer you seem to be gone somewhere.
Well, I've gone the last 4 years since I started.
So since I've known you.
Yeah. And I added Greece and Ireland and Portugal in the last couple of years. So, I don't have any plans to travel yet this year, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I've got a friend that lives over there, and it's interesting. I almost feel like I have a relationship with certain places, and now I'm trying to find out, like, where's that next place that wants me to be there so I can remember things to bring back.
Yeah. So I know you've been on a bit of a writing journey. I want you to tell me about that.
I quit my job in 2021, traveled for that first summer for 9 weeks. And the following year, I enrolled myself into a year-long writing class. I used to write poetry in my 20s. And after my divorce, I began to write more and study more and learn more. And so I joined this writing class, and it was with Susie Tucker, who was also my Constellations facilitation teacher. And I was in a group with 10 people. They were all women. We met weekly, and it really had me take myself seriously as a writer, which I didn't even know how to do. I didn't even want to call myself that. I just like to write poetry, or things would just be written. And I decided, it's funny because my very first class of that course, I was in England. And then my last night of that course, a year later, I was also in England. So I started there and ended there. But it has to do with words and creation and reading and invocation and finding who I am through writing, so it was just amazing. And I made a decision. It was like I was going to get married. I had a partner, and it's called writing, and I'm going to do this for a year, and I'm not breaking up until the year's over.
I'm going to make it work.
Yeah. Like they're moving in, and it really shifted confidence and just with the relationship with myself. But it helped me know that just to write for writing's sake, to write because I discover who I am through that, but also because it makes a difference. I read poems in the classes that I teach and in my work with people, and it's also really helped me discover the deeper depths of who I am, and I just decided that I wanted writing to accompany me for the remainder of my days, so I'm in the process. I'm 2/3 of the way through a little collection of poems. The title's called Wild Consent.
Okay.
That project went on the back burner for a year while my mother was sick and in hospice, and she passed away about a year ago. But I can remember being in Ireland in 2023, seeing this beautiful land, and I had walked through a monastery, and there was waterfalls, and it was just gorgeous. And this poem came when I got home, and I was talking to my mom that night. And I never would share fresh poems with her. I mean, it wasn't a practice, but I'm like, wow, something came when I got home from seeing this beautiful, land, this lake. And she goes, read it to me. So I read it to her. I can remember where I was in Ireland, and she was back home, and she just said, oh, Nance, I think that's the best thing you've ever written. And it's something, that wasn't really typical for either of us. Like just that has come back to bless me so many times. She actually read that poem into my phone without me knowing before she died, and we played it at her service. But, it was also beautiful because it was about what we learn and what we teach. And so writing seems to be my muse, right? There's a way that it accompanies us through some very difficult times, and also amazing, beautiful times. So the journey, and I'm in a writing class again now, which feels really good. And
so is it a particular type or style, or is it?
I would just say prose, free prose, and, just kind of short verses. And I do essays too. I'll write about a topic, or I'll introduce something. But usually it's more, poetic prose that just comes.
Well, I cannot wait to get one, a
Oh,
copy. I
I'd
will
love
definitely
to
be
get
buying
you
a
one.
copy.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations
Thank
for
you.
finding that or remembering that or coming home to that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you see creativity and happiness interconnected?
What I've learned is that when I allow myself to be creative, when I give myself to the act, whatever that is, like following that impulse to write or dance or be in the flow while I'm teaching yoga and letting words come in. When I give myself to that, I become more embodied, and it's one of the most satisfying things in the whole world. It's about presence, so it's really letting the force of life come through versus trying to manufacture it.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's an ease in letting creativity be the thing that makes you happy. It's just like writing for writing's sake, writing a prompt and laughing about it, or dancing, and just letting yourself be fully expressed. So to me, it's almost like becoming unstuck, whatever that creative endeavor is. It's different for different people.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a really beautiful way to think of the two. So you and your sister have walked a very conscious path, and I know along with your mother. And I would really, you've mentioned numerous times that she passed away about a year ago. And I can just sense and feel like the love that you'd share and that, that ache for your mother. I want to know how you led her through that journey.
That's a great question. My mom had COPD. She smoked until she was 50, and then she quit smoking at 50 so she could go scuba diving with me in Cozumel. But eventually the COPD kind of came in. And then she also had lung cancer. So she got pretty sick in 2019, got treatment, did great. She was super healthy and doing yoga and all that. But eventually through time, and age, the COPD worsens. It's progressive. And then the lung cancer came back, and we knew that it was slow growing, but we kind of knew those things were not, they were going to end her life for sure. Right. So there was being prepared for that. Through the recovery work, my sister and my mom and I shared 12-step recovery for many years. My sister's several years sober, 20-something years sober. I should know that, but
that's a long time.
Yeah. And so we were very close, and they both moved up here to Kansas City when my boys were little. She went into hospice back in October of 2023, and she wanted to die at home if that was possible. You don't always get what you want, right? But we through the landmark education programs and all the spiritual work that we'd done, we talked about that, as a conscious path. And we worked with Crossroads Hospice, which was an amazing organization. And they supported us in that. And so it was kind of cool. My mom wrote a letter to all 4 of us kids about not wanting a religious service, but wanting a service to celebrate her life and what her life meant to her and why she wanted those things, So it was very open and thought out and talked about. It was also heartbreaking.
Sure.
But it was also a beautiful way to walk consciously into the death, because it's happening to all of us. Stephen Jenkinson's a beautiful author who has a beautiful documentary called Grief Walker that's remarkable. And it's about telling the truth about death and dying and what happens and how we do it and what our choices are. Do we want to numb out? Do we want, all these machines, or do we want to go as gently as we can into that great next mystery, So we were a team, all of us. And we were blessed that she was able to die at home. And, the nurses came in, they managed the end of the breathing with morphine and things like that. But she was such a trooper. Yeah, it was just one of the most extraordinary things in the whole world. All 4 of her kids were around her when she died. My brothers drove up, and she had conversations with all of us. I mean, like, it could have been a lot different.
So she was lucid.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was very incredible, very incredible. Meeting the grief as it arose, the anticipatory grief of knowing. But it felt like something that we had traveled those journeys together before. So there was a strength in me that came out as a result of the work, but it was a strength in all of us. But there was such a beautiful, open, two-way conversation about death. And I remember giving her this this Vajra, which is a Buddhist symbol that's held by the green tar statues. It looks like a little thunderbolt, and it represents that which is indestructible. And I remember giving it to her, and it's like, I think I gave it to her for me, because it was like, we're going to get through this, and we're going to do it with open eyes, you know? So to be able to have those conversations and laugh about things. My sister threw a pretzel across the room in the month before she died. And my mom was very meticulous about her apartment, and, everything had to be in its place and stuff like that. And it fell behind the couch, and she goes, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to be here to see it." And we just still remember just laughing our asses off at that. And so, just walking that path was extraordinary. And then the initiation after, I was kind of prepared for the dying part. I wasn't prepared for the severance of a relationship with her body that I had for 62 years.
Yeah.
So what was cool about it, and grueling as fuck, was walking into that initiation. I'm so strong, and, we're going to do this. And then it's just like, how do you live with the absence of something that's been there your entire physical existence?
Yeah.
But it was like reimagining and redeveloping my relationship with her on a new level. We had the spirituality in the background, and I actually went to a psychic, a medium, a couple weeks after she died. And the psychic said, "Your mom said it's time to write the book." And she didn't know anything about me, the woman that I was seeing, didn't know, So there were some beautiful things, that came through, including losing that gold Vajra that I had given her. And I was like, oh my God, I think we gave it away to the DAV. I think it was in the recliner. It was like, God, I gave that to Mom when she started her hospice journey. And 2 weeks later, my sister found it in her basement in one of the boxes. And I brought it with me today. So really just moving deeper into fulfilling my own path of incarnation and actualization, whatever my blueprint is. Death is such a powerful teacher, because you realize, oh, what do I want to do for the remaining breaths? Yeah. How bold do I want to be? Maybe 85, 89%, maybe I go 101%, because this is what we have. Yeah. And then having the gratitude for all the things that she went through. Yeah. That helped determine my course. Like seeing her, it was like meeting her for the first time. And so it's been kind of a mystery school, to be honest, the last 9 months. Coming out of grief, you almost have to give yourself to it. Yeah. And not step over it. Right. I feel like, I'm just now coming out of those waters, but it's a learning process, and I know that we've ushered each other before, at these transitions, and I've written about that a little bit, and I know I'm going to write more about that initiatory process, because I don't think we're prepared for it in this culture.
As you were saying that, I literally was just thinking how valuable that experience that you had would be to other people. Yeah. I'm currently going through the transition of a dear friend, and she just got put into hospice, and it's very obvious how terrified she is. God. And that she's not ready, and that this is coming as a huge surprise, that this is the end. And, how I can best support her, with, it's just, there is an absolute need for more wisdom from your experiences. I think that the world could benefit from.
I love hearing that. I also love working with people in those areas, because there's nothing, the final bastion, right? Like whatever's unresolved, okay,
now's the time.
Let's stir it up. Yeah. So it's fascinating. It's really such a connection between life. We keep death here till the end, especially in this culture, Yeah. And and then to marry it back together because it was never gone. And then also to have to reimagine our relationship with the people that we love.
Yeah.
That it's not gone, the physical body's gone, but there's this new relationship that's emerging. So I think it's fascinating.
Well, and ironically, I just was with her this morning and she's full care, so getting her out of bed and getting her on the toilet and getting her back into bed and all the things and making her breakfast just the way she wants it. And, but I unfortunately ran out of time, but I really wanted to talk because we've talked about a service for her and what she wants. And like your mom, she did not want, and what's funny is this that you had in the relationship or towards the end is kind of what she's got a little bit of that. Like she has the pick line and she's saying, I guess it's going in the fire with me. Like everybody's kind of looking like, can we laugh?
Tell the truth. Yeah.
But I wanted to talk with her, and I certainly will capitalize it now on it after this conversation about, what are your beliefs? What are you afraid of? And not being afraid or needing to tiptoe around this inevitable outcome.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that greatly.
Yeah.
What feels like the biggest breakthrough or success around finding happiness?
I think there is a through line about all the places that I stopped along the way to learn that it's not what happens to us, it's how we respond. And that life is malleable. It is absolutely formable and shapeable and shiftable and malleable. And that we are the narrator, we're the director, we're the character, and we are the editor, which is perfect, right? Like, I can go back and rewrite the story of that heartbreak from 2019, or I can go back and reimagine my patterns instead of, being so harsh on myself. I can have compassion for what I was born into and the fact that I learned from them. So it's really about shifting the narrative and being the actual creator of that story.
Yeah. Life isn't just happening to you. That you do get to have a say and you do get to rewrite things any way you want.
Right. And that what ultimately matters isn't control. I've had quite a relationship with that throughout my life, but it's really about love. And I love very big. And sometimes there's not enough room or it gets messy. But like, I really want to, not miss out on those opportunities. I want my boys. My ex-husband knows how much glad I chose him to be the one, like, if tomorrow isn't going to come, how am I going to show up with you today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say pretty darn good. What practices are you leaning into to sustain joy in your life?
I love that word practice. I'm still teaching yoga and practicing yoga. So I love just being on the mat. It gets me out of my mind and has me feel my body. So staying involved in the things that I do love, teaching and weaving, walking. I just spent 4 days with my sons in Colorado. So hanging out with the people that I really love and dig. We saw a Nuggets game. It was insane.
How fun.
Oh my gosh. That's a whole nother story. But also, like I'm in a writing class. I joined a writing class. It was just this beautiful thing that happened, and really staying engaged in those things that I love. And then also being part of a spiritual community where consciousness is on the menu to be explored and to be embodied and to feel that, and be in nature. And also be willing to say, I don't know, because I don't really know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I have more freedom now than I've ever had. And to trust and not let fear lead me. Anyway, that's not a practice. That's just what I'm trying.
Well, and I feel like, more will be revealed. It always is, like what's next?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
If someone who is listening right now is just getting into living a spiritual life, what would you tell them? What advice would you give or make recommendations to do?
Well, I'd probably say you can't mess it up. even though you're going to think you're messing it up. To trust the body if it tells you it's time to move on or to go towards something. And to question, to be in the inquiry about the narratives that you were given, and to see if that's true as you continue to grow and develop in life. Is this still true? Is that value still true? So to question, to investigate, to ask, but also ask for help, to go to people that are mentors and wiser and therapists and healers and, just all kinds of things, and go to the things that bring you joy. It reminds me of a poem because I said you can't mess it up. So there's a poem I wrote, and I've been reading it recently in some of my circles. It's called Right on Time. This is what I would say to them. Sometimes the life we encounter meets a belief in us which must be dispelled in order to fully take it in. It's time to break the spell. You are right on time. Behind your eyes lay 1,000 sleeping dreams. Dare to take the step you were meant to take. The ground will rise to meet you.
Well, that summarizes and encapsulates basically our conversation. And thank you for stepping up and owning your power and being curious about what lights you up and bringing that then to others. Like, this community is so blessed to have you in it.
Oh, you're so
to have you
kind.
as a leader. And I
Thank
just
you so much,
really
Lindsay.
valued this conversation and getting to know you. I'm going to get tearful just
my
saying
gosh.
it.
I feel like, this was great. This is
I
one of the
feel
coolest
like-
things I've done in a long time.
We're really kind of growing
Yes.
like at this rate of like, I'm just going to trust, believe, and I'm going
Yes.
for it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go
do
for it.
And we have comrades along the way.
We
So
do.
we are not alone.
No.
That's huge.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
I love you.
I love you too.